honourable differences about the ultimate destination of Scotland's self-government journey. But all who campaigned this place were united in and by this fundamental principle: the democratic rights of the people of Scotland. That principle of self-determination was encapsulated by these words in the Scottish Constitutional Convention's claim of right: the sovereign right of people to determine the form of government best suited to their needs. When the late Canon Kenyon Wright, who led the Convention, demand for a Scottish Parliament question, what if that other voice we all know so well responds by saying, "We say no and we are the state"? His answer, "Well, we say yes and we are the people," was simple but powerful, and it is as relevant now as it was then. Presiding Officer, last May the people said yes to an independence referendum by electing a clear majority of MSPs committed to that outcome. The democratic decision was clear. The Scottish Government started the process of implementing that paper presented compelling evidence of the stronger economic and social performance relative to the UK of a range of independent countries in Europe that are comparable to Scotland. That should be both a lesson and an inspiration to us. Scotland, over generations, paid a price for not being independent. Westminster governments we don't vote for, imposing policies we don't support, too often holding us back from fulfilling our potential. That reality has rarely been starker than it is now. The Conservatives have just 6 MPs in Scotland, barely 10% of Scottish representation, and yet they have ripped us out of the EU against our will. They have created the G7 and saddled us with the second lowest growth in the G20. They are intent on stoking industrial strife, demonising workers and provoking a trade war. Businesses and public services are struggling for staff because freedom of movement has been ended. Our young people have been robbed of opportunity. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government will do everything in our power to mitigate the damage. But that is not enough. Our country deserves better. And yet this Parliament, looked to for leadership by so many across Scotland, does not have the power to tackle the root causes of the financial misery inflicted on millions. We lack the full range of levers to shape our economy and grow our country's wealth. We are powerless to stop our budget being cut. We can't block the Tories' new anti-trade union laws or stop them tearing up human rights protection. We're not able to stop freedom of movement. And while we invest billions in measures to help the cost of living, tens of thousands of children can be pushed deeper into poverty at the merest stroke of the Chancellor's pen. Presiding Officer, it does not have to be this way. Independence is about equipping ourselves to navigate guided by our own values, aspirations and interests. It is about helping us fulfil our potential here at home and play our part in building a better world. And that does take more than a changing of the guard. I fervently hope that the Tories the next election. They thoroughly deserved. But on the big policy issues of our time, from Europe to migration and fair for workers, Labour is more a pale imitation than a genuine alternative. Won't take Scotland back into the European Union or the single market, and neither will the Liberal Democrats. They won't restore freedom of movement for our young people. They won't prioritise over investment in nuclear weapons. Officer,
First Minister, sorry, could I just have a moment? I have asked that there are no interruptions during the First Minister's statement. I would be grateful if we could have some silence. Thank you.
Presiding Officer, independence won't always be easy for any country, but independence will give us the opportunity to chart our own course, to build a wealthier, greener, fairer nation, to be outward-looking and international, to lift our eyes and learn from the best. Presiding Officer, now is the time, at this critical moment in history, to debate and decide the future of our country. Now is the time to get Scotland on the right path, the path chosen by those who live here. Now is the time for independence. Presiding Officer, this Parliament has a clear democratic mandate to offer Scotland that choice. The UK Government, regrettably, however, is refusing to respect Scottish. That is why today's statement is necessary. The UK and Scottish governments should be sitting down together, responsibly agreeing a process, including a Section 30 order, that allows the Scottish people to decide. That would be the democracy. It would be based on precedent, and it would put the legal basis of a referendum beyond any doubt. That's why I am writing to the Prime Minister today to inform him of the content of the statement. And in that letter, I will also make clear of a Section 30 order with him. Presiding Officer, what I am not willing to do, what I will never do, is allow Scottish democracy to be a prisoner of Johnson or any Prime Minister.
Members, there should be no interruption. Any interruptions? Thank you.
Presiding Officer, the issue of independence cannot be suppressed. It must be resolved democratically. And that must be through a process that is above reproach and commands confidence. That is why I am setting out today the actions the Scottish Government and the Lord Advocate will take in the absence of a Section 30 order to secure Scotland's right to choose. The mission is to secure a process that allows the people of Scotland, whether yes, no or yet to be decided, to express their views in a legal, constitutional referendum so that the majority view can be established fairly and democratic. The steps I am setting out seek to achieve that. They are grounded in and demonstrate this government for the principles of rule of law and democracy. Indeed, respect for the rule of law and respect for democracy underpin today. Respect for the rule of law means that a referendum must be lawful. That, for me, is a matter of principle. It's also a matter of practical reality. An unlawful referendum would not be delivered. Even if it was, it would lack effect. It would not be recognised by the public. It would not lead to Scotland becoming independent. Presiding Officer, it is axiomatic that a referendum must be lawful. But my deliberations in recent times have led me to this further conclusion. The lawfulness or otherwise of the referendum be established as a matter of fact, not opinion. Otherwise, as we have seen again in recent days, opposition parties casting doubt on the legitimacy of the process so that they can avoid the substantive debate on independence which Scotland deserves, but they so clearly fear. That is not in the country's best interests. Let me turn to the details to that objective of an indisputably lawful referendum, and then ensure that from today we can focus on the substance of why Scotland should be independent. Presiding Officer, I can announce, first of all, that the Scottish Government is today publishing the independence referendum bill. I will draw attention in particular to three key provisions of this bill. Firstly, the purpose of the set out in Section 1 is to ascertain the views of the people of whether or not Scotland should be an independent country. In common with the 2014 referendum, indeed in Congress, and the referendum to establish this Parliament. The independence referendum proposed in the bill will be consultative, not self-executing. Just in 2014 and recognised explicitly in the 20 White Paper, a majority yes vote in this referendum will not in and of itself make it for Scotland to become independent. Legislation would have to be passed by the UK and Scottish Parliaments. Now, there has been much commentary in recent days to the effect that a consultative referendum would not have the same status as the vote in 2014. That is simply wrong, factually and legally. Let me be clear. The status of the referendum proposed in this bill is exactly the same referendums of 1997, 2014 and 2016. The next provision of the bill I wish to draw attention to relates to the question to be asked in the referendum. The bill states that the question paper should be, just as it was in 2014, should Scotland be an independent country? Finally, Presiding Officer, the bill includes the proposed date on which the referendum should be held. In line with the Government's clear mandate, this is a date within the first half of Parliament. Presiding Officer, I can announce that the Scottish Government is proposing that the independence referendum be held 18th of October 2023. These are...
Thank you. Thank you. Members.
These are the key elements of the referendum legislation that the Scottish Government wishes this Parliament to scrutinise and pass. Let me turn now to the aim of establishing as fact the lawfulness of which, as I have already indicated, I consider to be of the utmost importance. I will start with what we know already. We know that the legislature passed this bill in the absence of a Section 30 is we know that legislative competence can only be determined judicially. And we know that for as long as there is no judicial opinions will differ and continue to be cast on the basis for the referendum. That benefits only those parties opposed to independence because it allows them to avoid the substance of the independent. Finally, we know that if this Parliament legislate without a section, it will go to court. That is inevitable. The only questions are when it ends in court and at whose hand. The issue of legislative competence remains at the point of formal introduction of a bill. The UK Government will almost certainly use Section 33 of the Scotland Act to refer it to court after it has passed. It is also possible that one or more private individuals will lodge a judicial review of the bill. Indeed, it was reported last week that Tory supporters are already to do so. A challenge by private individuals could also go through successive courts and so be a very lengthy process. At the point of Parliament passing the bill, there would be no certainty about when or even if it could be implemented. A court challenge would still lie. The timetable I have set out today would quickly become difficult to deliver. Between now and then, claim and counterclaim, good faith arguments and bad faith fear-mongering about so-called will continue to muddy the water, cast up doubt and taint the process. Presiding Officer, that may well suit politicians, but none of it would be the best of the country and none of it would serve democracy. The fact is, neither legal opinions nor political arguments. We must establish legal fact. That is why we must seek now to accelerate to the point when we have legal clarity, legal fact. And crucially, doing so, I hope, establish and safeguard the ability of this Parliament referendum on the day proposed. Officer, it is to this end that some weeks ago I asked the Lord Advocate to consider exercising under paragraph 34 of Schedule 6 to the Scotland Act to refer to the Supreme Court the question of whether the provisions in this bill relate to reserved matters. This is a power exercisable by the Lord Advocate alone, not by Scottish ministers collectively. Whether or not so is accordingly a matter solely for her. However, I can confirm that the Lord Advocate considered this request. She has taken into account the following factors: this government's democratic mandate, the constitutional significance of this issue, the fact that the bill does raise a genuine issue of law that is unresolved, and the importance of ensuring that this government and Parliament act lawfully at all times. She has now informed me of her need to make arrangements in the bill to court. Indeed, Presiding Officer, as I speak, the process for serving the requisite paperwork in the UK Government by lawyers and messengers at arms is underway, and I can confirm that the reference will be filed with the court this afternoon. Presiding Officer, whether or not the reference is accepted, how long it takes to determine, and what judgment is arrived at are of course all matters I accept, as I have made respect the rule of law. However, by asking the Lord Advocate to refer to the court now, rather than wait for others to do so later, we are seeking to deliver clarity and legal certainty in a timely manner and without the delay and continued doubts would prefer. Presiding Officer, obviously, it is this government's hope that proposing a executing and which would seek to ascertain the views of or against independence will be deemed to be within the legislative competence. If that outcome is secured, there will be no doubt whatsoever is lawful. And I can confirm that the Government will then immediately introduce the bill to Parliament to pass it on a timescale that allows the referendum to proceed on the 19th of October next year. It is, of course, possible that the Supreme Court will decide that the Scottish Parliament does not have power to legislate even for a consultative referendum. To be clear, if that happens, it will be the fault of Westminster legislation, not the court.
Members.
Obviously, that would not be the clarity we hope for. But if that is what the law establishing this Parliament really means, it is better to have that clarity sooner rather than later. Because what it will clarify, Presiding Officer, is this: any notion of the UK as a voluntary union of nations is a fiction. Any suggestion that the UK is a partnership of equals is false. Instead, we will be confronted with this reality. No matter how Scotland votes, regardless of what future we desire for our country, Westminster can block and overrule. Westminster will always have the final say. Presiding Officer, there would be few stronger or more, and it would not be of the matter, far from it. I said earlier that principles would guide what I said today. The rule of law and democracy demands that people must have their say. Finally, in terms of process, let me confirm this, although it describes a scenario that I hope does not. But if it does transpire, there is no lawful way for this Parliament to give the people of Scotland the choice of independence in a referendum. And if the UK Government continues to deny a Section 30 order, my party will fight the UK on this single question: should Scotland be an independent country?
Members.
Presiding Officer.
First Minister, if I may, members, I do think it's important, regardless of the content of any statement, that we adhere to standing orders and that we continue to hear the statement without interruption.
What I have laid out today is about bringing clarity and certainty to this debate. Above all, it is about ensuring that Scotland will have its say on it. I want the process set in train today to lead to a lawful constitutional referendum, and for that to take place on the 19th of October 2023. That is what we are for. But if the law says that is not possible, the general election will be a de facto referendum. Either way, Officer, as the Lord Advocate is now referring the question of legality to the Supreme Court, that need longer be the subject of sterile. Indeed, the sub judice principle and our own standing orders demand that the arguments on competence now be made in court and not here in court. That means we can and we should now focus on the substance. That is what this government intends. In the weeks and months ahead, we will make the positive case for independence. We will do so with commitment, confidence and passion. The opposition, if they can, make the case for Westminster rule and then let the people decide. Presiding Officer, to believe in Scottish independence is to believe in it involves an unashamedly optimistic view of the world, the belief that things can be better than they are now. Above all, it means trusting the talents and ingenuity of all of us who live here, no matter where we come from. It is not a claim to be better than anyone else. It is about looking around at all the other successful independent countries in the world, the resources we are blessed with, and asking why not Scotland. Think of all our talents and advantages, unrivalled energy resources, extraordinary natural heritage, strengths in the industries of the future, brilliant universities and colleges, skilled and creative population. There is no reason at all that an independent Scotland would not succeed. Nothing in life is guaranteed, but with hard work and the independence to chart our own course, Scotland will prosper. And the people of Scotland have told us, all of us in this, the right to decide. Presiding Officer, today we have it.
Thank you. The First Minister will now take questions on 40 minutes for questions, after which we'll move to the item of business. And I'm grateful if members who wish to ask a question were to press their request to speak buttons now. And I call on Douglas.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I wonder if that SNP applause was to make up for the people in the public gallery actually walking out as the First Minister was speaking. Because Nicola Sturgeon is at it all over. Her eye is off the ball once more. The real of people across Scotland are on the back burner. Instead, the First Minister is putting her plans to divide Scotland front and centre. Nicola Sturgeon has shown again today that the SNP's selfish obsession with another divisive referendum is always top priority. She will use time and resources to further her plan to break up the country just when we need to pulling together and working as one. All of our focus should be on tackling these huge challenges we face now, helping families with their bills, supporting frontline services and creating good jobs. A potentially illegal referendum next year is the wrong priority for Scotland.
Members, we will hear Mr Ross. Thank you.
SNP members are unhappy about that. It is being referred to the court because the legality of it is not known. Therefore, potentially illegal referendum, and it would distract away from our recovery. It will damage efforts to rebuild the country after COVID. It is also the last thing a clear majority of Scottish people want. The First Minister speaks of fear. The First Minister speaks of fear. But what concerns all of us is the price Scotland pays for her continued other referendum. So we won't play Nicola Sturgeon's games. We won't know when there is real work to be done. Real work on the global cost of living crisis. Real work to invest in public services. Real work to rebuild our economy. Those are our priorities. And they're the real priorities of people across Scotland as well. But instead of focusing on the right priorities, Nicola Sturgeon is railroading this Parliament into talking about the SNP's obsession. On the First Minister's watch, this is becoming a do-nothing Parliament. Nicola Sturgeon has confirmed today that she will introduce a bill for another independence referendum. What is she doing about the country's priorities? Nothing. Education, no bills. Drugs, no ideas. Ferries, none that float. That is Nicola Sturgeon Scotland, and this Parliament is beginning to be a Parliament that doesn't get to act on the people's real priorities. A Parliament that only exists to further the SNP's interests. A do-nothing Parliament with a First Minister obsessed with another referendum at all costs. So can I ask the First Minister, why should the people of Scotland's real priorities be put on the back burner for another divisive, damaging independence referendum?
First Minister.
I think the last Ross had 3 jobs. He may be a do-thing MSP, but this is certainly a do-much Parliament. Douglas Ross has also demonstrated
Thank you.
an apparent inability to actually listen to what was said in a statement. I know that the legality of a referendum passed by this Parliament without a Section 30 order is contested. That is why I have asked the Lord Advocate to matter to the Supreme Court can be put beyond any doubt. A referendum that goes ahead indisputably legal because the Supreme Court will have deemed it so. And at that stage, any claims about boycott are sillier than they do now, and demonstrate one thing and one: Conservatives have no confidence in arguments for the continuation of the Union. Now, we have this strange conundrum, don't we, in Scotland, where the Tories suggest that nobody in Scotland wants the opportunity to choose independence in a referendum, and yet they have somehow managed to elect a majority of MSPs who propose an independence referendum. Douglas Ross also says that a majority don't want independence. Can I gently suggest to him, if he was confident in that, he would people of Scotland in a referendum. My plans are to equip this Parliament and this country with all of the powers and all of the resources that other independent countries take for granted and that we need to navigate the challenges that Scotland, in common with the rest of the world, face right now. The truth is, Scotland is paying a price for not being independent, ripped out of the European Union and the single market, suffering one of the worst cost of living crises in the developed world because of that, higher inflation than any other G7, lower growth than any G20 country other than Russia. We're seeing children pushed into poverty by a Conservative government that we didn't elect. Independent to better navigate those challenges, focus all of the power, all of the resources of this government and future Scottish governments can be on exactly that, addressing the priorities of the Scottish people by the Scottish people.
I call Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, it's important to establish the lease of a referendum, but it's also important to consider the timing, the context and the effect. And I think the First Minister gave the game away. This is actually all about the general election and the SNP having some relevance in it than actually about the Scottish people. But it's important to recognise the context of the election campaign last year. We were still a country living under COVID restrictions. Over 10 fellows had lost their lives. Nicola Sturgeon said during that who didn't support a referendum or independence through the recovery should vote knowledge that COVID recovery will be her priority. COVID hasn't gone away and our recovery hasn't even started. Since that election and when Nicola Sturgeon gave that pledge, 4,000 more Scots have lost their lives. 43 in the last week have died due to COVID. There are over 700,000 Scots on NHS waiting lists. and young people waiting for a mental health appointment. 20,000 fewer businesses than when the pandemic began. And this week, the ONS warned that inflation could reach 11%, meaning higher bills and deepening the cost of living crisis. For households across the country, it doesn't feel like the crisis is over. Isn't it the case that the pandemic Nicola that said she wanted to pull us through is gone, and the partisan Nicola Sturgeon is back, pursuing a referendum that two-thirds of Scots don't want right now? Worse still, she using the thank you she was given and the promise she made to lead us through the recovery to instead pit Scot against Scot and focus on her and her purpose. Frankly, Scotland deserves better.
First Minister.
Democracy is not pitting anyone against anyone. Democracy is allowing the people of the country, all of the people, to resolve differences of opinion on the Constitution. That is the only way to resolve opinion. It doesn't surprise me to hear the Conservatives say differently. It does still surprise me Labour set its face so firmly against that fundamental concept of democracy. Anna Sarwar said it's all about the context and the timing of a referendum. He may have more credibility, exactly the same as the Tories, which is that Scotland should never get the right to choose independence. And let me say, the First Minister standing here is the First Minister who always has believed that the right thing for Scotland to have the powers, the resources in our hands to chart our course in line with our values and the aspirations, ambitions we have for the country. I don't want a recovery in the mould of Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. Anna Sarwar is right. COVID hasn't gone away. But I tell you what has happened. A Westminster that we didn't vote for has taken the funding for dealing with COVID away from this Parliament. We're seeing a Chancellor take money away from the poorest in our society. The way to build a recovery, the way to build the kind of country we want, that Anna Sarwar and I probably agree on, is to put the lead in the hands of the people of Scotland. That is what independence is about. Anna Sarwar and his party set their face against that, and I suspect they will continue the way that they have over the last decade and more.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Well, here we are again, and what an appalling way.
Well, you have, of course, been listening there to the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, laying out the reasons that there should be another independence referendum held in Scotland. She said that she has now advised the Lord Advocate to go to the Supreme Court to check on the legality of the date when this referendum may be held on the 19th of October 2023. Let's bring in Dan Whitehead, who is up for have you with us again. So, quite complicated, but there is a process here, and it's going to first start, I think, at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's important to stress that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have to hold a legally binding referendum. So what the First Minister has announced is that she has announced a bill which has plans for their referendum on the 19th of October next year. The Scottish Parliament is already referring that option to the Supreme Court, the legality of it. If the Supreme Court says no, you can't even have that consultative referendum, Nicola Sturgeon says that will be out of Westminster's legislation. But clearly significant here that she is looking to hold a referendum or being consultative 19th of October next year.
Appreciate that, Dan. You are watching the Sarah Jamie Show. I am Kamali Melbourne. Coming up, Russia denies targeting a shopping centre in